All right, welcome everyone to the 2022 Utah BRIC Subapplicant briefing. This meeting is geared towards those who submitted NOIs for BRIC this year, as well as those who are interested in just learning more about the BRIC program and the application process. This year we had, as I sent out an email, we had about 31 NOIs that were submitted, notice of interest, for a total of just around $480 million. And of that, we had about 478-ish of that is for projects. So the rest were for plans and for project scoping, which we'll discuss. For anyone who's just come, if you could please put your name, title, and agency in the chat, we would appreciate it. Okay, next slide, Kat. All right, we're going to go over just a few major areas, an overview of the whole BRIC program and the actual process to do your sub-application and what is required. We're going to go over the BCA, the benefit cost analysis, and some EHP things, and then we'll finish up with the whole review process, and then we will leave time for a Q&A, and you are welcome to ask specific questions about your project or general ones or anything that you may have. So next slide, we'll turn it over to Emma now.
Great, thanks, Eric. Hopefully you all can hear me. If not, please let me know in the chat. So a little bit of an overview, and we'll go into the more nitty-gritty details here in a little bit. But here's kind of the overview of the BRIC process. So we've started, the sub-application period is now open. That's why we're here, is so that we can get you prepared and ready so you can start your sub-applications. That period is going to be open for a while, and again, I'll get into the dates on the next slide. And eventually, your sub-applications will be due to us here at the state, and then we're going to review them, and we're going to submit back some RFIs, and we're going to work on them so that they're ready by the time the sub-application period ends. So that way that we can send them to FEMA when their sub-application deadline is, so that way that they are ready and are more competitive in the national pool. The FEMA will review those applications, and they will let us know which ones that they will be choosing. There'll probably be some RFIs, as there always are, just to make sure that everything is squared away before they eventually obligate that project to us at the state. At that point, that's when we at the state take it back over, and we will award the grant to you, and then we'll be your grant managers as well. So as you're working through your project, you'll be submitting quarterly reports and keeping in touch with us so that we make sure that everything is running smoothly. When that project is complete, we will help you gather all your documentation so that we can submit so you can submit your closeout to us. And once we think that everything is squared away, we will submit that closeout to FEMA. And eventually they will close that grant. So that way you don't have to report on it anymore. Everything is paid out, the project or whatever is done. And then, but we do ask, due to FEMA's record retention requirements, that you hold on to those for 3 years. So that way, if there's any audits that arise or any questions, that we have those documents to pull from. All right, next slide. So here's our timeline for this year. If you've applied before, that might have been slightly different in years past, but this is what we've decided on for this year. So you've already submitted your NOI, that's why you're here. Now you should be equipped to be able to go in and start working on your sub-application. Your sub-application is going to be worked on and submitted in FEMA Go, which we'll get into later. But you have until August 31st to work on that sub-application, gather your documentations, work on your responses. And then on August 31st, that's when we at the state are going to review it. Your BCA will be reviewed. You will more than likely get at least one RFI, sometimes 2 or 3. An RFI is a request for information. And we do these just to make sure that your project and your application is as strong as it can possibly be. Since BRIC is a nationally competitive program, we want to make sure that your application will stand up against everyone else's. And in that time too, we will ask you to resubmit your project with the edits that we have suggested that you make. Our final deadline will be in December, and that's when we are going to submit all of our applications to FEMA. You may see online that the FEMA deadline is January 29th, and that's actually the deadline for the states to submit their applications. So we ask that that's why we set our deadline in December for the sub-applicants to the state. So that way that we can take your applications, gather them, and get them ready to submit up to FEMA with plenty of time to spare to allow for any technological issues or whatnot. Notice of selection will happen round 1 in spring. So round 1 includes like project scoping and plans. And then round 2 are the competitive projects, and we'll expect those to come out in the summer. We don't have strict deadlines on that or strict dates on this yet, but this is what we've projected and based on what's happened this past year. And that brings us into the summer or fall of 2023 is when we'll probably be getting RFIs from FEMA for those projects that were selected, and then an award in approximately fall of 2023. So like I said, up until the December 2022 deadline, it's pretty set in stone because these are deadlines that we have set. Past that, these are FEMA's deadlines, so we can't guarantee that they'll necessarily be on certain dates, but that's a general idea of when to expect those. All right, next slide. So just a quick terminology. You've probably heard me use sub-applicant and applicant a few times. This will come up quite a bit. So just to clarify, a sub-applicant is a state agency, county, city, town, or special district government. So that would be all of you. In other application and grant programs, you are considered the applicant. BRIC, it is not that. So you are a sub-applicant and you are submitting a sub-application. We at the state, so DEM, is the applicant. So we are the applicant that goes to FEMA. And so we submit our application, which comprises of our sub-applications. All right, next. In order to apply for BRIC, you have to have a mitigation plan that is approved by FEMA. It needs to be approved not only when the state submits our package to FEMA, but also at the time of award. So if you do not know when your mitigation plan expires, we'll go into it a bit later. But it's very important that you have an up-to-date mitigation plan because it does come up in the application in which you have to list your plan and when it was approved. And also you have to link your plan. This was an issue that we came across last year. You do have to include your mitigation plan and link whatever you are doing in your project to your mitigation plan to show that it coincides. All right, next. So there's 2 types of mitigation in BRIC. We have our physical mitigation projects. So that's things such as a generator or a seismic retrofit. Basically anything that involves construction is going to be that physical mitigation project. But on the other side of the house, we have capability and capacity building activities, or what will be commonly referred to as CNCB activities. So we'll go into that in a second. Next slide, please. So CNCB activities include building codes, partnerships, project scoping, and planning. For most of you on this call, it's probably going to mostly be project scoping and planning. So these activities are only allowed under Utah's state set-aside. As of right now, our state set-aside is 1.5 million federal share. So the state set-aside means that it's not in the competitive pool. So you're not competing nationally for these projects. So the project scoping and planning fall within our set aside. So we get to control, who gets that, gets those funds. But mitigation plans are our first priority, and that's because you have to have a mitigation plan to apply for non-planning BRIC grants. And we really are emphasizing mitigation. In addition to that, the priority is also going to go for multi-jurisdictional and county plans versus city plans. So if you have a mitigation plan that involves multiple counties, we're going to prioritize that one over a plan just for one city, for example. All right, next. So there are some ineligible activities that fall under BRIC. New construction. So if you have an old building, for example, that you don't really want anymore, so you're just going to tear it down and then just build a new one, that's not going to be allowed. The only way that is going to be allowed is if it affects an entire system. So if you, for example, have a big utility system and there's one building that needs to be replaced in order to mitigate the entire system, then that could be allowed. But you have to make sure it ties to an entire system and it's not just that you're replacing a building. Deferred maintenance or repair. So if there was something that you should have been maintaining during the life of the building, they're not going to replace that because that was your responsibility. Replacement of existing buildings or obsolete utility systems. Again, they're not going to pay for you to just replace it just because it's old. Preparedness and response activities. So anything like sandbags, fire trucks, anything that belongs in response is not going to be covered under this because it's a mitigation program. Removal of brush and debris, not allowed. Open space acquisition of unimproved land. Not a standalone project. So if your project requires another project to be funded in order for it to be complete, they're not going to fund it. So these projects need to be complete at the end of this project and not be reliant on another project being funded to finish it. Landscaping is not allowed. Activities that only address man-made hazards, also not allowed. This is for natural hazards. And then if construction has already begun, they will not fund it. So if ground has already broke, you've already started the project and now you're looking to get it funded, they're not going to allow it because you've already started. All right, next. A few other things to keep in mind is that you can't duplicate activities. Another federal agency has more specific authority. So if there's funding coming from another source, then they're not going to duplicate that with BRIC. It must be cost effective and technically feasible. So that's when our BCA is going to come in. So we'll talk about that a little later, but if it's not feasible, then they're not going to fund it and it'll be axed pretty quick. It also must follow environmental and historic preservation laws under EHP. And there's a whole section on the BRIC application that talks about EHP, and you have to make sure that you can answer those accordingly. So next slide, I will turn it over to Eric.
All right, now we're going to switch gears and talk about FEMA Go. So all of you should already be in FEMA Go and set up. If by some chance you were having some issues, please reach out to me. So FEMA Go is where you will work on your sub-application, where you will fill it out, where you'll make all your attachments, and where you will ultimately submit. So when you log into FEMA Go, on the home screen, you should see this apply for a new grant, and under the category mitigation : hazard sub-application, there should be a start sub-application. If you don't see that, reach out to me, because here at DM, we have to open that up for you once we've received your UEI number, your unique entity identification number. So this is where you'll go to do your sub-application. Next slide. All right, so once you click on that start sub-application button, you're going to see this screen here and the organization you're applying for. So if you remember, you're a sub-applicant, you're applying through DEM, and DEM is housed under the Utah Department of Public Safety. So that's the actual entity you were applying to, as you see there. So you'll click on Utah Department of Public Safety, and then you're going to add a title, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. And then for your sub-application type, there are 4 types you're going to pick from. A plan is if you are doing a specific FEMA mitigation plan. And then the project is that physical projects that we talked about. And then the project scoping are those who are doing the engineering studies or things like that. And the technical assistance is a different one that no one submitted for this time. And so we won't talk about it at this time. Next slide. All right, so once you've started your sub-application, this is the categories that you will see depending on your type. So project scoping, you can see, and plan have pretty close in amount, but for those who are doing physical projects, you have a lot more to deal with. So we will kind of go into these and talk about each one. We'll talk about some of them. Mainly we're going to focus on projects. For the project scoping and plan, you don't have as many, and they're a little bit easier, but we will delve into that, and you can see. So next slide. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, your title, we do require that the words 2022 BRIC begin with your title. So every sub-application needs to begin with 2022 BRIC. This is due to the organization of how FEMA Go is set up. And so we need that as the very first, so we can identify which ones are for 2022. And then we need to, hopefully you can include at least your entity somewhere, your entity's name somewhere, and somehow tie it to your specific activity that you're doing. You can try to make your title a little bit more catchier and kind of unique and to stand out for those reviewers in FEMA, but please do not make it long or vague. If it's too long, we will end up deleting it on our side and changing it. So try to make it somewhat concise, but having the proper information. If you are doing a project scoping, the title must include project scoping in it. So, okay, next slide. All right, I will turn the time over to Miranda now.
Okay, great. So just kind of to reiterate what Emma went over, for the mitigation plans, all sub-applicants must have a FEMA approved mitigation plan. And the FEMA approved mitigation plan, you must have that at the time of state to FEMA submission. So that would be December of this year, 2022. And the time of award, which would be around fall to winter of 2023. And in the FEMA Go application, it'll ask for the title of your mitigation plan and its approval date. So it's good just to know what that is. And then, so this chart on the right explains the plans that we currently have, which ones are expired and which ones are about to expire. So just kind of noting where your plan is on that. Currently, the Beaver, Garfield, Iron, Kane, and Washington plans are in FEMA review right now. So we're just waiting to get that back from them. But if you have any questions on your plan and expiration date, you can just ask in the chat and I can look into that for you. So next slide. So this kind of just explains, we have a website where we house all those mitigation plans. So if you wanted to visit that site, you can see all the regional plans. You can see the state plan as well. In a few minutes, I'll paste that link into the chat so you can go visit that website. Next slide. So I'll kind of read this section right here. It's just important to put information on how your project aligns with your local hazard mitigation plan into the additional comments section. So in that section, we're kind of looking for using specific language like goals, specific actions, or verbiage copied directly from your plan. And then below that, this is where we would like you to attach your plan. If possible, we'd like for you to take a snippet of your plan. So just where your community specifically talks about your community in that plan instead of the entire plan. You can put the entire plan in there, but sometimes those file, the size can be a little large for FEMA Go. So if you could attach just your section, that would be great. You can even attach your section there and maybe paste a link in the comments to the entire plan. So FEMA just has both of those to look at. In the next slide. So in the scope of work section, just to kind of go over some common questions. In the hazard sources section, here we're really just looking for your community's prominent hazards. So don't worry about listing all of your hazards, maybe just like 3 of the most prominent hazards in your community. And then for the evaluation process, here we're kind of looking for like if you're doing an update on an existing plan. So kind of write a description on how you evaluate your current plan and kind of what those updates would be. And then for implementation, here's where we kind of want you to detail planning steps and make sure that your final results will result in a FEMA approved mitigation plan. For the primary, we want about a paragraph on how you're collecting data, and this could be an example like through a subject matter expert. And then for staff here, we're just kind of looking for you to describe whether you are having your staff be in like an in-house staff or if you're hiring a contractor for the plan. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on that FEMA released a new local mitigation planning policy guide, and this will be effective next April in 2023. So if you're currently in the process of doing a plan, really follow this guide because that's what will be the standard starting next year. I'll also post a link to that in the chat so you can have that on hand. And again, if you have any questions, just let me know. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Miranda. My name's Max. I'll be going over more of the scope of work items related to the BRIC process. Starting off with the scope of work, it needs to be a very detailed and clear description. It's very important to hit that title, the thesis sentence, very clearly and succinctly describing the overall project so that there's a clear understanding of what it is you intend to do. There are a lot of folks that will be looking at your project that have never been to Utah before. They don't know a certain community in Utah. They don't know what you are planning to do. So you need to be very clear in your intentions. And then you can go into more detail. This will inform the state and FEMA right up front. There won't be any questioning what your intent of your project will be. It's the project, a couple of examples to build a retention basin at the mouth of Sweetwater Canyon. Also an example, the proposed mitigation activity is to purchase a generator for a certain city's emergency operations center. So keep in mind that your audience and what your intent needs to be to make sure you clarify for them and give them as few questions, unanswered questions as possible. Next, please. Okay. Sorry, my slide went down a little bit there. Now regarding phased projects, it's important to keep in mind that it's a single project pertaining to a complex project that has many elements in it. You could have, for instance, a phase 1 pre-work project, a preliminary engineering project, environmental and health protection process, excuse me. Is construction occurring within this project? You know, it is usually, unless you're dealing with project scoping or plans. Make sure you provide a clear and detailed description of your activity and how you will, the mitigation activity will be implemented. When you're talking about the affected population, you need to be very clear the population that you're talking about. You need to identify it as a detailed description and also what the percentage of it is based on the whole population. It's critical to show your work. Math is very important. All the reviewers will want to know how you got at those numbers, that you can justify those numbers through your description. So be very clear with that. Next, please. Some more project grant scope of work questions. You want to identify who will manage and complete the mitigation activity, and the hazards that are identified and what the risks will remain after the hazards have been mitigated. In other words, what the residual risks will be, and when the mitigation activity will occur, and then explain why the project you've chosen is the best alternative. In other words, you have to have alternatives in your project in order to make the one that you're choosing the most viable. You'll want to identify several alternatives. Most importantly, you also need to add a no action alternative. What will happen if you don't do anything? So make sure you do that. And please identify the entity that will perform any long-term maintenance and provide a maintenance schedule and cost information. Subapplicant or owner of the area to be mitigated is responsible, those sorts of things, for cost of the long-term care after the project is completed. And then describing the project, describe how it's technically feasible and will be effective in reducing the risk or eliminating any damage to the property or loss of life in the project area. Include any engineering designs, applicable building codes, level of protection, best practices, engineering practices, etc. Next, please. Critical element of your application will be photos and maps. Again, you're dealing with different reviewers. With some are real good at the literary word. Others have to see the project in a photo or an image or a map. So creating an enriched project that includes all of those components will only help your project. Next, please. Regarding the cost share. So a cost share can come from cash sources, donated in-kind services, materials, or a combination of all of those. But you cannot apply other federal funding. Some exceptions to that are the community development block grants and the REPI funds that deal with buffering zones from land uses near military installations. Those are the only two exceptions. Normal cost share is a 75-25. Now, if you offer 30% of a match, you'll get 5 extra BRIC points. If you're a small impoverished community, you'll get the 5 BRIC points at 90-10. If you go 88-12, you'll get those additional, if you go 88-12, you'll get the additional 5 BRIC points. Next, please. So the budget, the engineering costs are allowed to approach 12% of the budget. Pre-award costs, work done specifically on the grant itself prior to the date. But so you can prepare with the pre-award cost, but you cannot do any construction until after the award has been granted. We're talking about engineering studies, BCAs, environmental work, your environmental studies, and they must be identified as a separate line item on your budget. They can be part of your federal non-cost share, of your non-federal cost share, and you can have 5% management costs. You get 100% reimbursed up to 5% of your management costs, up to 5% of the total costs. Contingency costs are allowable as well for 5%. A suggestion that we make is to increase your other project costs if need be, if there's concerns that you're approaching higher limits, build them into your line items, your other project cost items, because you're going to be limited to 5% on the contingency line item. And you can combine them all into one category. The other thing that we want to do with those categories is you don't want to have a whole slew of them. You want just approximately 5 to 6 at the outside, just to simplify things. Thank you. Next.
Hey, Max, can I just jump in there one really
Oh,
quick?
please.
Just one item here that kind of relates to the contingency is everyone needs to remember that you guys are submitting cost estimates right now, and if you do get awarded, you likely won't get awarded for, you know, a year later for these. So you do want to take into account rising costs. We've had that happen in the past where costs have significantly gone up. So if you do want to overestimate on some of those line items, you are allowed to do that, you know, and so that way you can have that contingency if costs do rise. So
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate the clarification. On the FEMA Go side, you have your budget, you have a cost estimate line item, as well as management costs. The cost now, so if you have different management costs, you want to put them in, but you also have to remember the cost share component to put in as well, where you identify how much you're going to contribute. Thank you. Next. This is an example of a budget that has a lot of line items on it. You can simplify them with how they've been identified in blue there to make a more concise budget that'll go into FEMA Go. Next. This is an important slide here as well regarding the non-federal funding. A lot of times what we saw last year was the numbers didn't match up. In other words, a certain match letter was written on one date, but it was put in as a different date in FEMA Go, as far as the numbers also making sure that they equal the correct percentages. So it's important that first of all, that you go into FEMA Go and add the funding source as a line item there. Then what you have, if you look at the right column there, where you should have the same date as the match letter, that whatever the match letter date is, in other words, if you have a mayor or a community council that makes a decision on a certain date, that's the date of your match letter, and that date would also have to be represented here in this box. The box to the left, maybe they make the decision to approve funding in April, but the funds aren't available until January 1st the following year. So you want to make sure you identify that date here as well, and make sure that both dates are on the letter and in FEMA Go as well. Thank you. Next. This slide here simply identifies the budget narrative that you'll need to come up with. For each line item, you'll have to identify what's represented within that $7,500 cost for a pre-award, or the $82,000 for the construction. So you simplify the costs and then go into detail on the narrative so that it's fully explained what all those dollars will be going to account for. Thank you. Next. Touch on this a moment ago as well, the commitment letter. You need to submit that and attach it in the cost share section of your sub-application. Make sure you address it to our State Hazard Mitigation Officer, Kathy Holder. Identify with a statement that your organization agrees to pay that 25% local share, or if you're going to contribute more, put that amount in, and that it will not be from federal funding sources. And then again, the estimated delivery that those funds will be available. You know, we're at least a year from the award. So you have that opportunity there to identify, you may not have the funds for a while. That's okay. You just put in when they will be available and then make sure that letter is signed as well. Thank you. Next. And the schedule. Now the schedule, a common mistake also is having a dated schedule. April, we're going to start this, June, that. What you want to do is identify the months by number. Number 1 means the first month. So if the project's going to start, we don't know when you're going to get awarded the funding. You don't know when you're going to get awarded. So you identify the schedule by month 1, month 10, month 15, that way. And then we'll plug and play that when the schedule becomes more apparent. On the schedule, give yourself plenty of time. There's no penalty for completing a project earlier than scheduled, but you want to make sure that you have it done by the time you say. So we recommend at least 24 months for all grants. Make sure you put in your go, no-go milestones. Again, start the month off with a numerical month, and then the task duration is how many months it will take to complete that. So again, you can estimate if you think you'll have project 1 or month 1, you'll have project done in 3 months, maybe give yourself 6 months, whatever the case may be there. You'll know the best how to process and manage for that. The period of performance is 3 years, 36 months, starting on the date that the federal award has been, the recipient gets the federal award. So again, it could be a year or so from now. So that's where we're at there. And I believe that was my last slide. So now I'd like to pass the torch over to Kathy Holder. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Max. So I'm Kathy Holder, State Hazard Mitigation Officer, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the requirements that you have as well when you're putting in your grant. One of those requirements is making sure that you map out if your project is or is not in a special flood hazard area. You will need to print out a map to show that, or a fermet to show that if it is or is not in that special flood hazard area, either way, and then exactly where it will be located. And this is something that you will do even with project scoping. You'll want to show if that area that you're looking at for that project scoping is in or out of a special flood hazard area as well. So some of the special flood hazard area requirements, if it is a special flood hazard area where your project is going to happen, then you must be in a jurisdiction that participates in the National Flood Insurance Program, and you cannot be on probation or suspended from the program for that. The property owner must obtain and maintain flood insurance on that property for the life of the structure, regardless of transfer of ownership, and it must be deed restricted in perpetuity for that. So just be aware of that if you're doing a project in that special flood hazard area. Another thing that you need to be aware of, because as you're doing a project, this could actually, you have to have it, but it could hold up your project a little bit, so you'll want to look at it ahead of time, is when a floodplain development permit is required. And that happens anytime there is development in a special flood hazard area. And if you look at the list over here of what development means, that's pretty much anything that you could be doing. I always do the statement that if you're moving dirt, then you probably need a special flood hazard or a permit for development in that area. So you need to make sure that whether it's you're the community that you receive one, if it's a state agency, you still have to have a special flood hazard permit. Federal agencies and special districts, all of those do need to have a floodplain development permit when you're doing any work in the special flood hazard area. And now let's see, I think we're turning it over to Ember.
Thanks, Kathy. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the benefit cost analysis, or BCA. This isn't required for all projects, it's required for all projects, but not for any capacity or capacity building activities like project scoping or plans. You will need to use FEMA's BCA software, the 6.0 version or later. So if you have done a BCA in the past for a community and you're using an older version, just know you can't use that old version for this new BCA, for this new project, for this 2020 BRIC grant cycle. So you just go to FEMA's BCA website, download the 6.0 version, or if they come out with a later version before these are due, you just need to use 6.0 or later and you'll be fine. And FEMA is our region, which is Region 8, is going to do a virtual benefit cost analysis training. And that's coming up on August 8th through the 11th. That's a Monday through a Thursday. And that sounds like a long training, right? 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Mountain time on those days. But if you just attend the first day, they'll give you a schedule for the week. And the great thing about this FEMA BCA training is they go into each type of project hazard. So say you're looking at a seismic project or a flood project. So on that first day, they'll tell you, okay, we're going to talk about how to do the BCA for a flood project on Tuesday. We're going to talk about how to do the seismic on Thursday. And so if you don't have the whole week to watch, it's a great training to listen into, but you can pay special attention or just attend on the day when they'll be talking about the specific project that you're looking at submitting a BRIC grant for now. And they will go step by step through that process and share the tips and the tricks. Things are always changing. And so it'll be the very latest up to date about how to get your BCA over 1.0. So to make your project eligible, the BCA just has to be over 1. And while you're doing your BCA, if you have questions, FEMA has a great toolkit that will help you. You can send your questions via email, or you can call a toll-free number, and they're there 9 to 5 Eastern time, Monday through Friday, and they can answer any questions you have while you're trying to do your BCA, but they can't review or perform benefit cost analyses for you. The state is looking at hiring a contractor or BCA specialist to help our sub-applicants with their BCAs and review them. And so we will update you if we're able to secure that contractor, and if you do have questions beyond what the BCA helpline can help you with. And we've just put the upcoming virtual benefit cost analysis training from FEMA in the chat, but know that if you're on this email list, we'll also, anyone that submitted a notice of interest, Eric will also be sending out a follow-up email to let you know when that training is a little bit closer. Next slide, please. So general documents that you'll need to attach with your BCA. It's not enough just to do the BCA, unfortunately. You do need to document well, and you can't provide too many documents to FEMA. So this is what the NTR team uses to evaluate the accuracy and the completeness of your BCA. You can't just submit a BCA with a benefit cost analysis over 1, and they're just going to take your word for it. They need to see all the data entries, the backup, the records and citations that you used. That can include photographs, maps, census data, estimates from experts, just how you came up with those numbers so that FEMA can review your BCA and have confidence that they'll arrive at the same number that you did if they plug in those same facts and figures. Along with your sub-application documents that you need to include are the Excel format, the 6.0 version toolkit, and then when you're done, it also generates a PDF report. So both of those are required, and then you'll need to do a zip file of all supporting documentation because, as noted previously, FEMA Go does have some size limitation issues. So if you just put those in a folder, zip them so that they're not too large, it should be no problem uploading it into FEMA Go with your application. Next. required forms. So the nice part about FEMA Go is it takes you through all of the required forms. You don't have to hunt for them online. When it asks if you're doing a construction project, everything but project scoping and plans, you are doing a construction project. You may think, oh, I'm just putting a generator on a slab of concrete. FEMA considers that construction, any ground disturbance. So any type of physical project, just click yes. And then it will take you through the SF-424 forms that you need to do, whether it's construction or non-construction, a disclosure of lobbying activities. You may say, hey, we're a small community, we don't do lobbying. It's a really simple form. You just check, we don't do any lobbying, and that way you'll check all the boxes. So all those forms are in FEMA Go, and if you just check the yes box for construction or non-construction, it will take you through what you need and the links to fill those out. If you have any questions while you're filling those out, please reach out to us. We have done these forms multiple times, and they can be a little tricky the first time you do them, and we'll be happy to talk you through any questions you're not sure about and make sure that you do them right the first time. So,
Hey, Amber, really quick, the SF-424, I believe that they were supposed to put it in FEMA Go and it ended up not being in it. And so we will send out that specific fillable one, and I'll send out some specific answers to questions that a lot of people always have. So I will send that in the follow-up email to this. I will send you an SF-424.
Perfect. Thank you, Eric. Next slide. Okay, so the evaluation, we tried to make this as easy as possible. Use this slide to help you fill out these questions. So it's going to ask you if you're participating in the community rating system. Below in that little first box are all the communities in Utah that currently are participating and their score. So that'll help you answer that question really simply. And then it's going to ask you if you're a cooperating technical partner, and there are none in Utah, so answer no to that. And then it's going to ask you if you've adopted the latest building codes, both international and federal. And there in that third box is exactly what Utah has adopted to date. And this applies statewide. So those are really easy ways to answer those questions. And then for the building code effectiveness grading schedule, this is a great way to get some extra points on your application. So you need to reach out to your public works department or your community development department, and they should be able to tell you whether or not you have had this survey. And if you haven't, you can reach out to the insurance services office, and they ask them to conduct a survey. And this looks at how you're implementing your codes and how you're enforcing them, your building codes and standards. And you get a score from 1 to 10. 1 is the best score, 10 is the worst. And for the BRIC application, you get points if you have a score between 1 and 5. And it's up to 15 points, which can really tip the scales and help you on your application. So that's something worth looking into. If you don't already have it done, there's still time to possibly contact and get that survey conducted for your area and find out what your score is if you haven't already. So hopefully that's helpful to you. Next slide. Now we're going to talk about environmental and historic preservation, or EHP. And this is something that only applies to projects, not plans. It's your responsibility as a sub-applicant to conduct the EHP reviews, and then FEMA will review your reviews. So the information FEMA requires is outlined in the FEMA Go application. If you're unsure about what studies need to be conducted, you can reach out to us. Usually in the FEMA Go, we'll go through point by point. Like it'll say, are you within so many feet of an open waterway? Or are you, is your project going to be conducted on undisturbed land? So a lot of those questions will help you determine which EHP agencies you need to reach out to and coordinate with. But if you're unsure, again, the state is here to help you. We're going to send out something called a green sheet, which has the updated list of state agencies and federal agencies that you need to contact to do these EHP reviews. But know that it is your responsibility to consult with state, federal, and regional agencies on your project, which you determine what those appropriate studies are. The EHP checklist You just go down the list, answer questions, and yes, no, it will help you determine what studies you need to do for the project to be in EHP compliance. You could coordinate with appropriate agencies. What you need to do is send out a letter to them and then keep copies of all correspondence. You can provide verification to FEMA that you've gone through the thorough EHP review. When you're completing your application, you'll be asked what alternatives you've considered beside the project that you'd like to do. And I believe Max already talked about this, but one of the options you need to talk about is the implications if you take no action to mitigate the hazard. In your application, you need to identify the preliminary EHP studies you've done, and then make sure finally that the EHP reviews and the costs to mitigate the efforts on the environment are included in your project budget that you submit to FEMA with your application. You don't have to conduct the cultural resource survey, which can be a large expense for communities. You just need to get an estimate on what the cost of that would be and say this agency said we need to have a cultural resource survey. This is the estimated cost and include it as part of your budget. And then you will need to conduct that survey before the work could begin if you are approved for this BRIC grant. And sometimes it takes these appropriate agencies weeks or months to do their EHP reviews. So start early so your project isn't delayed. Next slide. Like I said, we'll send out that green sheet and it will help you. And again, some of these agencies like Fish and Wildlife Services, Army Corps of Engineers, they're not able to get you an answer a week before this application's due. So if you just reach out now, send those draft letters. The state has draft letters that we can provide you with if you have any questions or you need a reference. And it's a really simple process. And then they will respond within, they have certain days based on their organization when they need to reply to your request. And then you'll just have a better idea as far as your budget and what you're going to need to do about the EHP steps that you need to take to make sure that your project's in compliance. Next slide. Okay, finally, I'm just going to talk about supporting documentation and attachments that you'll need to do. These differ depending on whether you're doing a mitigation plan, a project scoping, or a project. And in those boxes, it's very clear. It talks about, they're all going to require a match letter and a budget narrative. And for a plan, you're going to need participation letters. So these are signed letters from each jurisdiction that wants to participate in your mitigation plan. These need to be started now because, again, sometimes mayors and city councils or county commissioners need to meet and it's hard to get on their agenda in a short amount of time. So just reach out now and let them know. We just need a letter of support saying we're updating our regional mitigation plan and this city or county or this school district is interested in participating. And then FEMA will use all of those letters to know what interest there is in completing that plan and who's going to be participating. So for your project scoping, like Kat discussed, you'll need to include location maps. Like if it's in the floodplain. And Max said, photos are a great way. A lot of people aren't familiar with our area. So as much documentation and visualization as you can provide along with your project will really help sell it to the national committee that will be reviewing these projects. And for your projects, additional things that might be required are those EHP letters and the BCA, any engineering reports if you've done them to date. And then if you are considering doing an acquisition, which would be, say you've got an area that's prone to landslides, and so you'd like to acquire some private land to mitigate against future landslide risk for your community, you would need additional information and documentation, and we here at the state can help you with that. You need voluntary participation forms from potential landowners, and again, that can take some time. You also need any meeting documentation about town hall meetings that have been held to discuss acquiring this property. So there are some additional checkpoints that you need to make sure you're in compliance with, and the state will help you do that. So just reach out to us if you're considering an acquisition project, and we will make sure that you're complying with all of the BRIC FEMA requirements. Finally, I just want to say that indirect costs are allowable. So I had to ask what this was. This is if you want to include the cost to like rent a building or for, your utilities that you're using to rent this building while you're working on your plan. So if you have like a dedicated staff members that will be working to update your plan and you want to include the space in the building that's just dedicated while they're updating the plan and the utilities and stuff that are going into that area, those are allowed costs, but they do need to be separated on your budget. And you need to include an agreement. So typically you'll have an agreement like with the city saying, we're going to use this much space and this much, in utility bills monthly to complete this project. Just know that those are available. There are something that you can claim, but you just need to make sure that you document it separately. Finally, I just wanted to note that if you are a water management district or someone who isn't a typical city or a county, but you want to apply these grants to apply for you as well. And when you're doing the building code effectiveness grading schedule, you can use the score that's based on where the project is being implemented. So if the project is going to be pretty much located in one city, then you'd use the BC EGS score of that city. Or if it's countywide, you'd use the county score. You just need to justify in your explanation to FEMA that your water management district, this is where the project is located, and that's why you're using the score that you're using. So again, if you have any questions on that, we're happy to help you with that here at the state. And I know some of this may seem overwhelming, but just know if you just follow the FEMA Go questions, and if you just ask for our help along the way, if anything is confusing, that's what we're here for. And this process is getting streamlined over the last 3 years, and I think it will be a lot easier than it's been in the past. And like I said, we're here to help. So Kathy is now going to talk about the schedule that you'll be expected to follow as you submit your BRIC grants to the state.
Thanks, Ember. Okay, so as we're moving along here, our deadline for you to submit your application to us at the state is going to be August 31st, 2022. We want you to put all of your information in FEMA Go, but do not hit the submit button at that time. You're going to let us know that you have your application ready and it's ready to go by using the Google form link that will be sent to you and be ready for you so that we know you're ready for us to start reviewing your application. And then at that point, we'll do our review process that we have at the state. We will, as Emma and others have talked to you about before, we will send you possibly requests for information. One thing I would say to you is if we send you an RFI or a request for information, know that the reason we're sending that to you is because we want you to have the best application possible. And you're obviously missing something that is going to hook up your application and probably kick you out of the running for monies if we're sending you an RFI and you do not actually follow through with what we're asking you to do. So we're not sending that to you to just give you more work. It's because we want to be able to help you to do what you need to do and to get the grant that you would like to have. So we will let you know when the final submission deadline is. And this is when you will actually push that button in FEMA Go to do the final submission. Don't do that till we let you know that you've corrected everything, we've got everything in there, and that it's ready to go. So just pay attention to as we send out those emails and let you know what's happening. Eric will keep you very informed on that. So the sub-application review process, we already talked about the state ranking and review. Then it goes to eligibility and completeness review, and we'll talk a little more about that. Then a technical evaluation review, and then a qualitative evaluation. So these are separate things that happen by different people, and we'll talk about each of those. And then after that comes the notice of who is going to be selected for those grants. So in the state review and ranking, as we talked about that, we will review the eligibility and completeness of your project, and we will look at the BCA. Hopefully we will have a contractor that will also help us to go over your BCAs and make sure they're good. And we will rank them in order of what we believe that you meet the criteria to move forward, and in what level per all the applications that come in. So we will basically, if there's 25 applications, we're going to rate them from 1 to 25 and go through that way. C and CB activities are ranked above mitigation projects, just so you are aware. And we're going to look at everything on a cumulative score. So when we're coming to FEMA eligibility and completeness review, just some information about what that looks like. So there are 115 points possible. It's to determine if you, the applicant, and the sub-applicant, and us, the state as an applicant, are eligible to do the grant. FEMA are the individuals that will review the sub-applications for eligibility and completeness during this process. It's going to be that FEMA regional staff. So for our region, that's FEMA Region 8, they're going to do this initial review. They're going to look at your eligibility of your community as a whole. Do you have that mitigation plan in place, and all of those things? Is the project and activities and costs eligible? It has to be something that actually works within the BRIC realm and what is eligible for the activities. They're going to look at the completeness of the application that you've turned in, the eligibility of the non-federal cost share, make sure that that's all in place. And if the project aligns with the approved state hazard mitigation plan, as well as your local hazard mitigation plan. So that's what's going to take place in that. Also, you as the sub-applicants, to satisfy the eligibility and completeness review, are moved to the next step of the process if you make it past that. Those not meeting the criteria will stop and not be funded at this step in the review process. The eligibility and completeness have to be confirmed before you move on to the next step in the process. Next, we're looking at the technical evaluation. Now that goes on to a different group at FEMA. So that's not us at the state again, it's another FEMA entity. And they're going to verify if the BCA is good and if the feasibility of the sub-application within that realm. So they're given the technical nature and mitigation projects. FEMA will convene this national review committee that does this. It's called an NTR panel. They'll evaluate the sub-application to determine both project's feasibility and effectiveness. As I said, the NTR will be based on the information provided in the sub-application. So if you didn't provide the information, they're not going to go out and search for it, including the scope of work, the cost, and they will evaluate the project sub-application against the following 3 criteria to determine feasibility. The conformance to accept engineering practice codes, standards, modeling techniques or best practices, and work schedule as described in the statement of work. The effectiveness at mitigation hazards for which the project was designed, and the accuracy of the cost estimates. So here is where your 115 points come through with this. And as we look at each of these individual points, sections where you can get these points, I'm going to go in more detail as we get to the qualitative, because I was on the national review panel for that. But know, as when I do talk about those qualitative pieces in the next few slides, that you're going to want to look at each of these pieces of the infrastructure projects, mitigates more than one risk. You're going to want to look at all these in the same way that I'm going to talk to you about looking at your qualitative criteria as well. So just keep that in mind as we're going on here. So here we are at the qualitative criteria. So as I said, think of those other criteria that we just talked about, even though it's two different categories, and make sure that you're thinking about those in the same way I'm going to talk to you about the qualitative criteria. So let's look at number one. So this is risk reduction and resiliency and effectiveness. This criteria carries the largest points of 35 points. Key elements of this and looking at this as a sub-applicant is to describe how the project will reduce community risk and increase overall resiliency. It provide ancillary, and I can't even say that word, ancillary benefits and leverage innovation. So with the ancillary benefits, it could include how the project will address inequities and provide the greatest support for those with the greatest needs. Keep that in mind because that is a key thing that goes on with all federal grants now. Number two, climate change, and the next one we'll go on to is climate change and other future conditions. Does your SAB application describe how the project will enhance climate adaptation, detail how the project is being responsive to the effects of climate, detail how the project is being responsive to the effects of other future conditions, and cites data, sources, and assumptions and models. If you're not backing up what you're saying for the climate change with some type of model, and you could go out to NOAA to get that model, but you need to back it up with a model or they're not going to count all those points. And being on that national review panel, make sure as you're putting this information into your grant and you're writing it in there, and we'll give you a document after this to kind of give you some more hints on more ideas and what you need to put in there. But make sure that as you have it there, you're writing it into your statement of work, and then you're backing it up in all of the other areas with documentation, and that you very well show them where that documentation, and it's very easy to get to. As you're naming your documentation, state, hey, this is such and such to talk about climate change, so that they can go and say, oh, in the statement of work, they talked about climate change, and this is the and where the documentation is, what document I'm going to look for to do that. That will make a big difference. I know we've talked about before in other BRIC meetings that it's good to have a page where you reference out, or a checklist or some kind of way to say, this is where I'm looking at each of these criteria throughout the BRIC criteria, and where you can find it in my statement of work, and where you can find the backup documentation. So if you can do some kind of table up that does that, where it's really easy for those reviewers to find that information, all the better, because they are reviewing many applications and they need to be able to access the information very quickly and move on with those applications. So if you don't have it laid out there and it's not easy to understand what it is and where it's at, it's not going to be helpful. We'll move on to criteria 3, implementation measures. This criteria carries a point total of 15. Key elements they're looking for there is, does the sub-application describe how costs and schedules will be managed, and how the project will be implemented, and how innovative techniques to facilitate implementation will be incorporated. So talking about implementation measures, you're going to describe how the costs and schedule will be managed, how the project will be implemented, how innovative techniques are being used to facilitate the implementation, and how they'll be incorporated. Another thing is moving on to the fourth qualitative criteria, population impacted. This is really, really an important piece. I noticed a lot when we were doing reviews that it was hard to link in how they were talking about within people's reporting and within their statement of work, how they were looking at the population impacted. And then how, when you look at different pieces of that population, how you engage them and how they would be impacted. So I'm just going to go through 4 basic things that you need to demonstrate in your sub-application. So you need to demonstrate a community-wide benefit, Then you need to demonstrate the portion of the population that will be impacted, including a description of the disadvantaged communities. This is huge. This is a piece of what they're requiring for all federal monies now. That is as in referenced in Executive Order 14008, and we can get you more information on that. Third, how the project was selected and designed to maximize positive impacts and minimize negative impacts to a disadvantaged population as referenced in that same executive order. And fourth, the proposed project is clearly benefiting a disadvantaged community. This can include charts, graphs, raw data, estimates, and even narratives discussing how the project will be benefit both local community and its social vulnerability population. Those things are very huge, and you need those things to get your points. So I'm going to give you an example of that. An example of a population impacted by a community impacted negatively, because you want to show how it could be positive or negative. Outreach is to the community of the proposed project, to the people identified in the population impacted, leveraging partners that are in the groups that will help realize the project for that population impacted, such as if you had some individuals that perhaps a large community of individuals that were hard of hearing, what things did you put together to be able to reach out to them? How did you include them in your outreach? How did you include them in helping for this project, and how does the project help them? And fifth, qualitative criteria for community outreach. This criteria carries point total of 5. Key elements of this is the subapplicant describes the outreach strategies and supporting activities appropriate to the project and advanced community mitigation, the types of community planning processes leveraged. And let me tell you that it was really hard to find for a lot of communities, and they lost points on that. So make sure that you are showing the types of community planning projects that you leveraged, and describe how input from the diverse range of stakeholders, as we've talked about, some of those could be, including people from disadvantaged communities, was gathered and incorporated into project concepts and designs. You know, a lot of times people or communities or applicants don't go out there and engage individuals till they've already made the plan for what that project is. Well, maybe that's something you should be looking up as before you start the project, or in the beginning, as wherever you are now, as soon as you can, start engaging those others, because they may put a spin on your project that you didn't know was there, and that can help that community set of the diverse community out early on, and actually help your project get picked as well. So just think about those things. Also, things you can use again for this: charts, graphs, raw data, estimates, and even narrative discussion of how the project will benefit both the local community and the social vulnerable populations. And final, but not least, leveraging partners. This criteria has 15 points on it. Key elements of leveraging partners are, so you've got partnerships of state, territory, tribal, private, districts, local communities. As we talked about, it could be some of those disadvantaged groups in the communities, and making sure that they ensure that the project meets community needs up front. An explanation on how these partnerships benefit disadvantaged communities, and an explanation of the anticipated outcomes of those partnerships, leveraging resources such as finance, materials, educational resources, coordinating multiple jurisdiction projects, and a heightened focus on equity-related issues. That was a mouthful. Sorry, guys. And so I'm just going to show you one piece of something that we're going to send out to give you an idea of questions or ideas to pull out all of these things that will help you make that better application, that will help you get this grant. And so this is one for future conditions. And we will send you out a paper, if Eric hasn't already, showing you for each of the qualitative criteria, some of the ideas that you'll want to look at for adding in to make sure you get this grant. So just as an example from this, on each of them, it'll put a location in FEMA Go in the application where you should include the information for this, such as in the climate change and future conditions information in the evaluation section of FEMA Go. There is a specific area for that. You'll probably also want to include something in your statement of work for this, but you definitely need to include it into that area. As they're reviewing, they're going to be looking for that. And you can look at, does it include all of these things? What anticipated future conditions are there? How is the grant project responsive to identified anticipated changes, and so on? So just know that as this is emailed out to you, take it into account. Don't throw it off to the side and say, I don't need it. If you want a BRIC grant and you're going for a project, you're going to want to pay attention to these. Is this still me, Eric, or is this where you come in?
I'll take this one.
All right, thanks.
Okay, I know this has been a lot. We just have a couple slides left. And I just want to say that I've already sent you guys a lot of attachments. I'll be sending you a lot more following this. There will be the full, all the criteria, the technical and qualitative criteria and how FEMA defines them. And just so everyone is clear, the way Utah operates is we've moved up our timeline ahead of FEMA. So in order to give everyone the most time they can to work on these rather than rushing at the last minute, because we want the best sub-applications that we can get. The notice of funding opportunity is where FEMA's official announcement of BRIC last year came out, I think like the first week of August. So we're anticipating that it will come out around that same time. And virtually like 95% of everything is the same. They do make a few tweaks. And once that the NOFO comes out, we will find out what those tweaks are, and then we will hold a follow-up meeting to make sure that everyone is aware of that. And last time they tweaked maybe a few of the criteria, they maybe changed the points to be up or down or kind of clarified something, but 95% of everything is the same. So like every question in FEMA Go will likely be the same. They have things like that. They might tweak a few things. So we will inform anyone of any of the changes. So we would say do not submit your sub-application before the NOFO comes out. So we make sure we capture any of those little changes that may happen. And I would just like to say that here at DEM, we are more than happy to accommodate any concerns or issues you may have, or if something came up and we need to work around the deadline, we're happy to do that. If we have an issue that comes up, we will give each and every one of you plenty of time if issues like that come up. So just reach out to us if things like that, and we will work with you. Like I say, we're not going to plan on ultimately submitting till December. So we have, from now till then to work on our applications, the sub-applications, make them the best we can. So just a few tips now as we end here. So just remember to write clearly and simply. So, you want to write like a 6th grade to an 8th grade level. We have a lot of engineers that work on these, and you want to avoid a lot of the technical jargon. You can obviously include engineering documents in your attachments and things, but in your sub-application itself, you've got to keep in mind, and this is mainly for the project grants, but for project scoping as well, for the projects, if it's going to go to the national review panel, you're going to get, people from all over the country of different backgrounds, of different education, and you're going to want to make it as simple as possible and to read and to understand. Use the exact verbiage of those criteria. So if you have a reviewer who's trying to say, okay, how are they going to review this criteria? If you use the exact verbiage that they have, that will help them identify that better. And consider adding an attachment that lists the BRIC points. You have them in your application, your sub application, but consider an attachment that lists all the criteria that you think you meet and how you meet it and justify it. So the reviewer can pull up one attachment as well and have it all there. That gives you a double advantage. Just an idea, not required. Just try to be well organized throughout your application. So as you work on your sub application and like in a paragraph you say, see this attachment. Make sure that the attachments are clearly labeled and not some really long name with all these numbers and thing. This is the match letter, the sign match letter, or this is this engineering study. Like, make sure you label it clearly, and that in the body of the text you label the exact attachment, so it's easy for the reviewer and FEMA and the state to find that attachment. So try to have a well organized, like I say, you're having a lot of justification for, like, since FEMA has to spend 40% of their money on equity, the Justice 40 thing that we may talk about after the NOFO comes about, where it's been mandated that FEMA has to spend 40% of the money for those social vulnerable populations to meet equity requirements. So if you can identify your project and how it meets any of those social, those vulnerable populations, whatever it may be, and you have an attachment with data justifying it and making it look pretty and attractive, that will give you a huge advantage. And just remember that FEMA Go has a big, like a hard time dealing with big attachments. So a lot of times, if you have, these massive engineering studies, and it's just, I don't know of a limit, but sometimes we can't even download them here. They'll just spin and spin forever, and you ultimately just can't see it. So, I mean, it can take big attachments, but it's the very big ones. And if you want us to test it out, because we can see your sub application on our side. So if you do want to try to attach one, and just to make sure if we can get it, just reach out to us and we can see if we can download it. If not, consider breaking it up so that everyone can see it. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what's next? So as of right now, everyone should be starting in their sub application. So at least you can go in and fill out your community information, work on your mitigation plan. We don't want everything to be crammed into that last week in August where you're just doing everything. Try to work on things a little bit here, a little bit there. And then ultimately, when you finally click that submit button in FEMA Go in December-ish, November, it could be October, November, December, depending on the state of your sub application and how things go. Then the state will rank them. We will put them into an application. We will submit that application to FEMA. And then you have the Region 8 reviewers who do all that, likely in February. And then the project grants that meet, that have enough points. So basically, if you're doing a project grant, it's basically all based on points, as well as if you can hit those vulnerable populations where you can maybe fall under the Justice 40, but it's essentially based on those currently 230 points. We'll see if FEMA adjusts it a little bit. And then in about April to May, it depends on how it goes, FEMA will announce the set aside the planning grants and the project scoping grants. and then there'll be an RFI phase, and then likely, hopefully, they'll be awarded summer. And then for the projects, won't be announced until the summertime. And then you have the RFI phase, and then hopefully in the fall or so, it will be awarded. FEMA will make the announcement on their website, and we will email that out to everyone when those selections come. But just remember, it is a lot of waiting. A lot of times our Region 8 partners are also in the dark and have no idea when these things are going to happen. And so once we hear something, we will email out. And so a lot of times we sometimes just wait for months, and you may not get an RFI, and we just wait. So we will help you guys along the way. We want the best you guys can do. We are happy to answer any questions. If you need to set up a private meeting to just kind of discuss and go over things, please email me and we can schedule a meeting. So, okay, next slide, Kat. All right, thank you guys all for attending. We will open it up for questions. You guys are happy to drop off. If you do have any specific questions, please ask. You're welcome to type them in the chat or turn on your mic and ask questions. It looks like Sarah said, FEMA Go doesn't allow several attachments. Last year it was about 5 in each section. Has that changed? I remember last year some had more than 5, but they did have some problems with attachments. But I believe you can do more than 5, but if not, I'll have to check that this year. But if they don't, please put in a FEMA Go help desk ticket as soon as possible, because they're really slow at fixing changes. So if you do run into that this time, please call the FEMA Go help desk, put in a ticket. And the more people that do that, the higher it moves up on their tier system. So if that is the case, we at the state can put in a ticket for that, and we can ask a few other communities too. But I haven't heard if that's changed or not. Camden said, you said you would send out the recording of this meeting. Will you send out the PowerPoint slide? Yes, we will. In the follow-up email, we will send out the PowerPoints and a whole bunch of documents and information as well. Oh, Ember, thank you for answering that. But yes, anyone, you're welcome to drop off if you don't have any questions and wait for the email, or you're welcome to ask them now. Yeah, Kat, you could stop recording now.